I'm Annelies van de Ven. I'm a PhD student at the University of Melbourne. And one of the things we like to do with our students at Melbourne is we like to use a technique we call object-based learning. It's not our own, it's very old, and basically it involves letting the students interact with objects firsthand. And the reason we do this is because we believe that objects carry agency, so the ability to affect change. So if you let a student interact with an object, that way they engage with that object, and with it they engage with the period of the past, the events, and the people that that object represents. So it creates a link between the student in the classroom now and the past that that student is trying to understand. So when we talk about the Cyrus cylinder is an object with an immense amount of agency. It is embroiled in the narratives of not just specific people, but also nations. The nation of Iran, even the US, Israel, and Iraq are all connected through this one object. I like to call the type of agency it has active valency, and valency is a term that's kind of stolen from chemistry first and then linguistics as well. And it means the bonds between atoms or words in those two contexts, but how I'm describing it as the way that an object is able to create connections between different people and different events in the past. In the next 15 minutes, I will be giving a bit of a background on the Cyrus cylinder, describing the object and what's been written upon it, because it is an inscription, as well as giving a bit of a taphonomy for the object, which means explaining how it was deposited in the place it is now. And then I'll try and show how it creates those connections between different people through the narratives that it has accrued over time. The Cyrus cylinder is a barrel-shaped inscription, and it is now located in the Iran Room, or Room 59 of the British Museum. It holds 45 lines of text in total, and it has an inner core of gritty clay, and then the outer surface upon which the inscription is written is very fine clay. And that inscription that's written upon it actually discusses the conquest of Babylon by Cyrus the Great. And on the inscription, it's divided into three different parts. The first part is in third person, and it's describing how the god Marduk legitimates Cyrus's conquest of the city, and also how great a ruler Cyrus is and how good he is to the people. Then the second part is written in first person by Cyrus, and that's kind of the bit that we see connected to the Bible as well, saying, I am Cyrus, the great king, king of kings. And that's where he himself is describing how he's a legitimate ruler. And then the final part is him explaining his renovations to Babylon and his reconstructions after the conquest. The cylinder is about 22 centimeters long, and its highest width is about 10 centimeters. To put that in perspective, it's about the size of a rugby ball, or I guess a football. So it's not that big an object, but still it has this amazing effect on people that it's able to accrue narratives of identity for different nations. So the cylinder was most likely produced in about 539 to 530 BCE in Babylon, and it was, as I said, a foundation inscription meant to commemorate the conquest of Babylon by Cyrus the Great. It was uncovered by a team of archaeologists from the British Museum. We're not entirely sure where in Babylon it comes from. We assume it's from the southern wall, which is now in the southern part of the Amran hill. So it's a mound, and it's the southernmost part of that, and it's called Jimjuma. We're not entirely sure just because the documentation is extremely scanty. Half of it's gone missing, some of it's a bit iffy. The people who were excavating themselves, so Rassam and Thomas, even disagree on where the object was actually found. So just in that short explanation of what the Cyrus cylinder is, already there have been two different locations that I've described. The first being Babylon, so the place where the Cyrus cylinder was created and the place where it was found. The inscription is written in Babylonian cuneiform, not Persian, and the audience for which it was created was also a Babylonian audience, and that's shown by the fact that Cyrus uses Marduk, which is a Babylonian god, as the person that he tries to gain legitimacy from. The second place that we can consider as a home for the cylinder is the British Museum. And that is because that's where it's currently located. It's been there ever since August of 1879. And that's the same year that it was found, so really from its finding until now. And it's been curated by museum staff, it's been conserved by museum staff, and the British Museum has made it available to about 20,000 people a day. So a lot of people, when they hear this story, because the Cyrus cylinder is really something that's now identified with Iran, and they wonder how an object that was found in Babylon, and it is supposedly Babylonian, how does that come to stand in the gallery for Iranian archaeology? It is in the Iran room. And that's where the idea of belonging comes into place. And this is an object that really is multivocal. It speaks to a number of different groups of people, and each time it speaks within their own symbolic language and to their own narratives. Depending on who you're talking to, it can be seen as displaced or right at home in any given place. The British Museum is a typical example of that. So I'm not talking about ownership in the traditional sense. I'm not talking about repatriation or stewardship, but rather I'm talking about the object's affectivity and its relevance to different groups. The cylinder's connection to Iran can really be seen in its connection to Cyrus the Great, the Median ruler who was able to conquer Babylon, and he ruled from about 559 to 530 BCE. He's seen as the founder of the Achaemenid dynasty and also the founder of the Persian Empire. He's the father of the people of modern Iran as well as ancient Iran in their own eyes. And he really put ancient Persia on the map. And he's seen as not only a great ruler and a great conqueror, but also a fair ruler. And slightly anachronistically speaking, we often call him an enlightened ruler. And this is very important in Iran, considering that their own cultural struggles from in antiquity to today have brought them in contact with a lot of Arab culture and Turkic culture that has really begun to integrate with their own culture. It's begun to mix and mingle, so you can't really tell one from the other. So this idea of this anchoring point of true Persian culture for them is very important. However, the Iranians aren't the only ones who consider Cyrus a great leader and a semi-prophet, you could even call him. But in Jewish and Christian sources, you can also see Cyrus as this kind-hearted ruler who liberated the local populations, let them go back to their lands, back to their religions. And this is reflected in the cylinder's own text when Cyrus says on line 32, "I collected together all the people and returned them to their settlements." Even the US has a strong connection with the Cyrus cylinder, its maker, and its history. And Thomas Jefferson, one of the key founding fathers, and the man who is accredited with writing the Declaration of Independence, actually read the Chiropedia, the upbringing of Cyrus, by Xenophon before he wrote the Declaration. He then integrated much of what he learned of Cyrus's enlightened method of rule into the founding of the United States of America, speaking of all people being created equal and their inalienable rights that could not be violated by anyone. The Cyrus cylinder thus embodies a number of different individual identity narratives and national identity narratives, but it also creates networks of relations between these narratives. It's sometimes called a political football. Again, its shape really plays into that. And in a sense, you can see it as in a friendly match, it's being passed along by people of the same team in good faith to aid in a friendly game, or it can be seen as something that must be taken or claimed from the opponent, something that should be competed over. I prefer to see it as possibly a hostage in negative relations, something that seemed to be taken and not shared. or someone that seemed to be taken and not fairly taken, or perhaps an ambassador in more positive relations. And that way it also really gets the agency that it deserves. A map can be drawn connecting the different places that the Cyrus cylinder has meaning, so the different narratives that it's embedded in. And this map has also become one of physical movement through the Cyrus cylinder's display and exchange in various museums and institutions. So as I said, it was first displayed in the British Museum, and at first it was in the gallery of Assyrian and Babylonian tablets and inscriptions. But then almost as Iran gained an appreciation for its own pre-Islamic identity around the time of the Second World War, the British Museum really caught on and created its own Iran room. So they really started getting into Iranian studies as such, rather than just seeing it within Assyrian or Babylonian traditions. And then it moved there from case to case, from traditional inscriptions to the treasures of the Persian Empire being placed next to all the gold of the Oxus treasure. And then now it stands as a gateway object within the gallery. So it's a node within the museum itself, around which the rest of the collection stands. In 1971, the cylinder, one of the museum's most prized possessions, finally went to Iran for the celebrations of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi Shah for the 2500th anniversary of the Persian Empire. During its stay, the Shah proclaimed it the first document of human rights, which is a concept that Cyrus and his scribes would not actually have been familiar with. But despite this anachronism, it still was, a caste was created, and this was given to the United Nations as a symbol for Persia really, and Iran, modern Iran by proxy, leading the way to global tolerance. So while he created this narrative, it didn't really stand the test of time, as we all know. And ultimately, his giant celebrations, his lavish parties, and all the money he spent really destabilized his rule. But this didn't stop the Cyrus cylinder from featuring more recently in 2010 within the Islamic Republic of Iran's own celebrations and own displays. The Cyrus cylinder was brought to Iran by members of the British Museum, and in a lavish opening ceremony, it was uncovered with an Iranian flag that veiled it, and there was a Cyrus impersonator there and a giant replica of the cylinder. And again, this was another way of co-opting the power of the narratives that the cylinder embodied. So on the one hand, this was the power and prestige of the ancient Achaemenid Empire, but also the more recent international associations of liberation, progressiveness, enlightenment, and human rights. Certainly, the Cyrus cylinder still has a very strong meaning for the Iranian population, as supposedly about 1 million people went to the basement of the Iran National Museum to see the Cyrus cylinder when it was there. This exchange was not a sudden occurrence, but it actually took place within a larger framework of exchange. And the British Museum, previous to the loaning of the Cyrus cylinder, had gotten a number of objects on loan from Iran for its own Forgotten Empire exhibit. And it was an attempt by the curators to really change public opinion about the Persian Empire and promote a greater appreciation for its history and for the contributions that it makes to the modern world. Beyond Iran, the cylinder has also traveled to Spain, India, and the US. And in India, again, this idea of it as a symbol of human rights comes up, as it is displayed alongside the Ashokan Edict of 300 BCE, which is considered the first Indian document of human rights. But despite these positive humanitarian messages that the cylinder has, there's also an argument that can be made that it's quite exclusive in its message. And each time a new group takes on the cylinder and gives it a new meaning, there is a sense of exclusion that comes with that meaning, and certain people are not considered part of the narrative. So when the Shah made it a mascot in his own celebrations, he excluded from Cyrus's heritage anyone who did not identify with his secularized notion of Persian imperialism. And then again, with the new regime, Cyrus becomes a symbol of their own religion and their own vision for the nation. And statements were made such as, Cyrus would have been a good Muslim, and the Cyrus impersonator I was talking about earlier gets a keffiyeh scarf placed around his neck by a member of the pro-government militia, just to appropriate him within their own narrative. This again is to show a linear descent of the new regime from the great monarch, excluding many other narratives and even those of alternate religious groups within their own nation. What this shows is that the history of an object can be far more than just a record in a museum archive. In the case of the Cyrus cylinder, it is inextricably linked with the development of an institution, of a body of knowledge, of a discipline, of nations, and of individuals and their own history. So rather than being just a progress, a linear development of the object, going from being a foundation deposit to being displayed in a museum, instead it becomes a constellation with a number of different meanings, and each time the Cyrus cylinder becomes something different within those different narratives. It has no single instrumentality, and while I think it is important to remain aware of the historical developments that created the Cyrus cylinder and that also led to its uncovery and its display, it is equally important to display and to consider its multi-vocality and its ability to create networks between individuals and cultures across space and time. It plays an active role in forming these connections, and that ultimately is its real power. Thank you.